Obviously, there has been quite some problems in the African continent with, for example, Boko Haram and like all that stuff.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons why my dad doesn't want me to go back to Africa to see where I grew up, which I'm really sad about, because they said it's too dangerous. But I really wanted to know how that affects the system.
Business as a topic is in Africa right now is that there's so many ideas, there's so many startups, there's so many ideas that have not even started, but most people just don't have the capital to scale whatever they've started or to even start in the first place. So I would say people are doing great stuff.
Alright, so pay attention to the rules. Okay, so now you guys are gonna be the judge of this game. Okay, your time starts now. Time up. Alright, so next in line is Patrick. Alright, then we have Susan Hopewell. I call her Mama Africa. Okay, so we have a fourth panelist, but she's not here at the moment, but she brings a lot of energy to the table. Glad you joined us. Have a seat. Okay. All right. So, Abby and I are going to go back and forth with questions. So she's going to start.
The first question is, how do you define diversity within the African context? Personally, or from one of the diverse countries?
Yeah, Africa is the most diverse country I've ever seen. Look at the representation itself, this is a very diverse group. And not diversity as in just in quarters, but diversity in all aspects of it. It's business, education, infrastructure, politics, development. In every aspect you look at it, I think it's a real true representation of what diversity is, and that's my honest opinion.
Diversity is more focused to me on diversity of thought and background, especially since we're here in the university. I think in most African countries, you find all extremes of life. So like the very rich, the very poor, the very dark, the very fair, the very privileged, the very disprivileged. And so it's being able to live and work together as a community and in sync, understanding another person's background and being able to accommodate for the things that are good and as a group reject the things that are bad, so that we all have like the diversity of all the good things together in one. Thank you.
Visual definition?
However you want to go.
Diversity to me also, I think, really resonates to me in terms of experiences, because I think about the fact that I'm here. I grew up in America as an immigrant child. I came here as a refugee with my family. And so being able to adjust, as she kind of alluded to earlier, for me it really resonates with adjustment of experiences and being able to see the breadth and the wealth of where that adjustment can take you, and also in some ways how sometimes it's just not accepted. And so I think when I think about being at home and when I was little, and then versus being here, speaking 2 different languages at home, speaking 1 language in the community, and then even learning another language in school, all of that, I really just think about diversity also in terms of the depth of experiences that we have.
I think in addition to everything that's been said, thinking globally, I think it's important for us to understand it's not only the groups and subgroups and subgroups, et cetera, also how we define, being a member of the African diaspora individually, as well as our relation to the collective group. One of the things Patrick and I talked about was, the relationship between African Americans and people from the continent of Africa, and how on this particular campus it has gotten better versus at the University of Missouri, where I come from, it was very tense for a significant period of time. And so I see more coming together, but I think part of that is the beginning of a better understanding of one another and our mutual relation to one another, but understanding who we are individually and as it reflects the greater collective in the group.
Thank you. Those are all really amazing answers, and I like the fact that you all incorporated personal experiences into it. It makes it more relatable. One thing that I'm interested in knowing from you guys is, okay, diversity in the context of Africa, if you think about it. Even there was a time there was an AU conference in Ghana or somewhere, I don't remember, and I remember they were talking about how they wanted a United States of Africa. And then I thought about that was like one crazy idea, just because even the number of languages, you can even within one country in Africa, the different languages that we speak, and putting that together in a whole continental basis, that was just like, I'm like, this will never work. There's just way too many differences and too much diversity. So when you think about diversity with all the different contexts as you've all spoken, do you think this is an advantageous thing for Africa, or is it disadvantageous for us?
I love the fact that we're different. I do, because what I get to witness, so I'm coming from the East Coast, the East Side. So I'm immediately thinking about food right now and thinking about the types of food that we eat on the East. And then I meet my West African friends, and there's a battle between who makes the best jollof rice. So, see, Nigeria's already going forth about that. And then I'm also thinking about those who, I think about faith. I think about how really in a lot of our countries, there's such a beautiful marriage between those who come from Muslim background and also Christian background. So to me, I love the diversity, because when I don't feel like eating my home food, I can go to my next door neighbor and grab something that I like from there, or go to the north, or go to the south. So I think it's more of an enhancement, but I think oftentimes we're forced to downplay those unique attributes of our diversity.
Thank you, Susan.
Are we allowed to ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, because I wanted to hear what this is meant to achieve, basically, this question. Because there was a time in Nigeria when Nigeria, like, okay, all Ghanaians must go back to their country and all that. So can we look at this concept from that angle? Can we talk about how do we achieve unity even in diversity within different African countries?
Thank you, Noah.
Go back to what you said earlier about the thought of having a united Africa is impossible. I disagree with you on that because I've had the opportunity to travel a lot to different parts of the world. And if you go to places like China, you will think that everybody speaks the same language. You'd be surprised they have so many different languages. However, they've managed to forge a unity that helps them as collective, as a group, to advance and grow. That's the objective we're trying to achieve here. Because with our individual level languages, and even you take countries like in Ghana, Nigeria, you can find one person who can speak about 10 of the other languages, so it's hard to tell where they're from. If you can't tell by their last name, some of them it's impossible. So I don't think that should be a sort of a barrier to prevent us from coming together collectively with an objective of growing together. Like Noah was saying, going from West Africa to South Africa, you become a foreigner in the same continent, and you were told to go back and be mistreated, and that's, I don't see how we're going with that. So it's like if you go to India, it's similar. Indians have so many languages, and until you go there, you wouldn't know. You would think they're all Indians, but they managed to forge a unity, so we can do it. It can be done.
So if this can be done, why is it that we haven't done it? And how can we do it?
I think that's a good question, but that's why we're sitting here talking about it.
So I have an opinion on that. There's kind of music, do I have to? So there is always going to be conflict in humanity from now till thy kingdom come. Like there will be conflict. It's a natural thing of life. What is important is how you handle that conflict. You are mentioning a United States of Africa. I would rather that didn't happen because I'm very proudly Nigerian. But thank you. But not necessarily. But not necessarily because I don't want to associate with other Africans, right? There is beauty in having small governance and small ruling. A lot of our countries have very corrupt leadership. You can't imagine having that for the whole entire continent at once. So now, to what you were saying about, people coming together. People come together when there's a common goal. Americans, there is no one definition of what American is, but everyone has this idea of freedom and the American dream. It's defined very, very differently for every individual, but they all have that same one goal, so that no matter how, the society crumbles apart or something like that, everyone still identifies as American. Africans, we've had our own culture and traditions and stuff for so long, and I don't think necessarily that we have one particular thing we're working towards, or at least there's no one that's leading that effort. You hear a lot of things like this, or, teenagers talking about it on a podcast, or people mentioning it on the news, but no one is actually, at least that I've seen, trying to come together to define a goal or a few goals that all of us can unite under and try to work towards that. Because what happens is you see a difference, right? You're talking about African Americans and Africans. There's same historical background, but what has happened is one group has seen something fundamentally different in another group that they cannot accept. There are certain things in American culture that I cannot accept as from me. Well, most of them are moral. So there are certain things that I cannot accept, but they're not American culture, they're just what a lot of Americans seem to believe. So then I find a group of Americans who also reject that, and even if they're completely different from me, race, skin, language, anything, because those core values are the same, those have become my own people, even within the America. Do you see what? So it's more about finding the values or whatever it is that you all share, or at least you want to share. So you don't necessarily have to, if it's honesty, you can be a pathological liar, but you want to stop. And then you have a group of people who are trying to stop that together, and then that's what would do it.
I agree. And my thing is this, I think it's also important for us to consider, I think trying to come together and have some common language or anything, I think we'll be a mistake. I think the beautiful tapestry of Africa is something that most African Americans envy and desire to have. And I use an I statement, I envy and desire to have. The other thing is I think it's important that all of us understand the impact and the depth and the breadth of white supremacy and its impact globally and the colonization and the efforts that has gone into all of the countries of the world and its lasting and sustaining impact. And so what happens is we have this notion of scarcity where there isn't enough for everyone. And so we come together, whether it's the Igbo or the, someone else in a culture or ethnicity that separates, oh, well, you're not part of us, so we're gonna separate from that group. And then we separate not only from the continent, then we say, okay, well, they're Americans and they're this and they're that. And that's one of the reasons you never really see this true notion of what is considered, as you say, American values. But when you look at the history of people of color in the American narrative, for example, the decimation of Native Americans, indigenous folks, African Americans is the only group that is here that didn't choose to come. And so how does that impact this notion of American values, which we have a country that refuses to actually acknowledge what happened 400 years ago this year? And so and I'm not even talking reparations, I'm talking acknowledgement. Stop saying in Texas that people were brought here as indentured servants. No, people were brought here from African communities and countries as slaves. And it's important that we acknowledge that. But trying to have this historical erasure and ahistoricism, is I think important. But I think, again, it's further of the impact of white supremacy that impacts all of us.
And I think I would say, since I see you kind of stole my notes, because the next question I have here is, what is your view on Africans, African diasporans, and African Americans relations? How would you view that? And I think a while ago you said something about how you think it's relatively better here than in Missouri. Why would you say that?
First of all, I love all you, right? Because I love all of us, I say it that way. I think that it's getting better. I think that once we begin to understand there's a commonality amongst us, and I think the other thing that Patrick and I talked about earlier is the interesting conversation that I had with my friend Samba from Senegal. I brought him in October, and he talked about his frustration with people that are coming from the continent who seem to strive to get away from their culture and their homelands, and versus the people in America who are desiring to connect to that culture and that homeland. And so it's like it's like we can't come together, because even then some of us are still going opposite directions, And so, but I think once we begin to understand there is going to be that diversity, there is going to be that difference in terms of racial and ethnic identity, and as it relates to where that goes, my hope is that we can come together with a mutual love and respect, first within the African diaspora, and then also globally, internationally. So I keep dreaming of Wakanda, that's all I can say. All of us coming together. Right?
So what needs to happen for all of us to come together? Because I'm hoping that, by the time we all finish like this, that every one of us will, go home with some action steps. Because I kind of feel like whatever change needs to happen has to start at the individual level. What needs to happen?
Well, first there needs to be some acknowledgement. Like, for example, I'm taking this off and I'm buying me some African attire. This is all I have, and this, you know what I mean? So first of all, acknowledging that, I was telling him, how do you have all of this Eurocentric stuff and you don't have any African stuff? You see, first acknowledging those small things like that. First of all, how do you acknowledge that you had the Google Stango to know where it was at when you used them in October, right? But then also, how do you work within your sphere of influence? Like, for those of you who have not been to the new Bruce Nesbitt African American Cultural Center, you'll notice that we were very intentional, and I personally was very intentional about pushing to make sure that we had the diaspora represented within the building. And so you'll see that. And as we get ready to get more artwork, you will see those things becoming more and more manifest. You'll see us partnering with groups like ACA, and now, as I was telling her, I didn't know about it. And so when you know, well, as Oprah said, when you know better, you do better, right? And so I think we have to be intentional about what it is we know, and just like when I do my diversity and cultural competency training, what is it that I believe, and why do I believe that, and how have I critically examined what it is I believe, and who taught me that? And so start with self and what it is you believe in, those type of things, and then how do you expand that, have a conversation, particularly across difference and, like I said, within the diaspora.
Hi. So you mentioned kind of being intentional, and as African Americans kind of getting in connection with with our roots. Kind of how do African Americans go about that, especially when they don't know what their roots are? You know, Africa is extremely diverse, and so as an African American trying to understand or make sense or attach oneself to, you know, what is African culture, what country should I gravitate towards, it can become overwhelming because it's like, how can I become intentional, how can I progress when I don't even know which direction to go?
Right, specifically, and what I meant, I didn't necessarily mean a specific country. I mean, it's great if you can do that type of research and connection to your ancestry. But I mean, first of all, realizing that the Tarzan movies are based upon lies. Right. Okay? First of all, it's based upon stereotypes, myths, and assumptions that are not true. So that's what I mean is let's start there. Right? Let's start with the fact that there's beautiful beaches and stuff in Africa that we're never shown. Right? Why is that? Right? I believe that we're intentionally kept that from us, you know. And so there are things that Samba taught me and continues to teach me that actually broke me down and made me cry because I felt like I had been duped. You know, I was that kid in 5th grade that said the little word that I won't use here, but you know, the offensive term, oh, look at you, you an African, this, that, and the other thing, right? First of all, acknowledging that, right? And as you have children, tell them that's not acceptable. So I'm talking about the things that you can do. And then so, you know, I don't necessarily believe in Ancestry.com and all of that. I don't know about all that because that's you know, there's a profit margin behind that. But accept it all, you know, and if you find yourself internally connected to one country more than the other, right? The other thing for me personally, I actually had Nigerians back at the University of Missouri that took me in and accepted me. Now, you know, so you know, that's the only group that had reached out to me and cooked for me and taught me some things, and we did research, you know, about Boko Haram and all of that, and you know, I'm like, we ain't riding with that, right? So when you do that and you feel that connection, you know, I go with it. So if I was to claim any country, for me it'd be Nigeria, because that's who claimed me.
I want to also extend that idea. So to me also, you asked a very important question. What I'm seeing is that there's a lack of real relationship. And I say that because if I'm in the same classroom with you and there's only 2 of us in the classroom, but you act like I'm not even there, that already sends a message from me. Or you see me in the hallway, or you see me in the street, all of that, and you still don't, not even a head knowledge or a smile or something, you know, because I think there's something beautiful about when, at least when I came here to the university, one of the things we were taught was, as a Black population, we're very small on this campus, believe it or not. So when you do see a brother and sister, someone that looks like you, acknowledge them. Because that's probably the only other time you will ever see them in your entire time of your undergraduate experience. And that was just undergrad. So I grew to that, and I had the kind of experience where at the Black House, then the former Black House, that anybody could come in and talk and share and hang out, things like that. But yet the other aspect was there was a real relationship that was created. So whether it's talking about hair, talking about different hairstyles, whether it's talking about, I don't care, I think the biggest thing I see a lot is even food. Just coming together over food. So to me, we can talk about, you know, hair and makeup and the headgear and all this kind of thing, but if you're not willing to go beyond that and actually have a relationship with me where we can really talk about some dynamics and ideas and values, then it's just a bunch of just kind of surface level conversation, and it really won't move anywhere. So to me, I think it's not just acknowledging as far as what's happened on both sides, but also really being able to take the risk and find someone, or when you meet someone, be willing to develop a relationship with them.
Thanks, Susan.
You know, I think it's also would be helpful for us to meditate on the term global African, I think, and what that means. And I think when we talk about global African, implicit in that is a visceral connection as a result of slavery, colonialism, and the sort of contemporary versions of that, let's say in the United States, with African American citizens being, you know, shot at traffic stops, right? Sudanese people have been shot at traffic stops. Africans are being shot at traffic stops, right? So I think we need to understand that first and foremost at the base, right? And then, on the other hand, Africa is a cornucopia, right? 54, 55 states, right? We in the diaspora are the 55th state, right? Because, I mean, I guess Sudan is the 54th, yeah? So this diaspora, so we have 55 states to borrow from. All of it is ours, you know? And so I think we have to understand that, but it also in terms of the relationship between African Americans and Africans, that's getting better. But we have to understand too the trauma that all of us have undergone. I mean, you talk about the values in African American. I mean, we're all suffering from the double consciousness again of slavery and colonialism, and you know, we're all crazy. And we're all fantastic, you know what I'm saying? We all have to like dig through that together if we're going to, I think, get anywhere in the 21st century. And I think it's not just one-sided. I mean, myself in this university for many years, as I tried to interact with Africans, for many years, I had to make Africans talk to me because I'm African, you know, and what I found was that was not really a problem after a while, but I also, I think we have to understand also what Africans have to go through, right? And sometimes you have to be here 5 or 10 years and get called the N-word before you start to understand the trauma that has occurred here. And also, African Americans, we need to understand that, you know, we have absorbed the raggedy epistemologies of Western culture. But Africans have too. And so, you know, I mean, we have to sort of cleanse ourselves. We don't have to follow a Western model of diversity. We have so much of our own to dig into.
You all and every one of us, what would you say unity looks like in the context of relationships between Africans, African diaspora populations, and African Americans? And I want us to try as much as possible. It's possible I just identify some, you know, concrete, you know, things so that as we are listening, at least folks can think through those concrete, you know, recommendations or characterizations as we, you know, what kind of the event.
I don't know if unity necessarily pertains to all of us speaking the same language or having the same core value. It's impossible because we're human beings, and regardless of what it is, we're going to have basic differences between us. But when we talked about unity, I think I agree with what the lady said earlier. I think regardless of where you come from on the continent, whether you're born outside, your experiences of being, everybody is the same people. We're the only ones that see differences amongst us, regardless of what your experiences have been in the past. So that's very important that we remember that. And because everyone sees us as the same people, it's very, very important for us to figure out a way to work together collectively for the greater good of every one of us. And that's when we talk about unity. It's very diverse in itself. There's so many branches of unity. Unity in front of economics, infrastructure, politics. It's just so many. Religion. It's very, very diverse. But there's one thing that we all agree on: that we all collectively are seen as the same people. And because of that, we should learn to figure out a way to forge some sort of unity that will give us an all advantage.
For me, unity means everything he said, but also about, again, the initial acknowledgement. I see, and in addition to that, I'm willing to work toward the collective uplift of all of us, right? And so that may mean that not everyone reaches the same level, but everyone receives the effort, the energy towards the communal uplift. That's what it looks like for me, all of us pulling together so that everyone can have their best foot forward at all times, whenever it's possible. And that, again, that's going to be in varying degrees and varying ways, but how are we, I like to say all the time, I want all of us to win. All of us. Not some of us, not most of us, all of us. And we may win to different degrees, but all of us.
Thanks.
So, and continuing to build on that, I have to say, not just because I'm a college of ed student, but I will thank you, represent. The other thing that's very critical, well, two things that are very critical. One, dismantling what the media attempts to tell us about one another. Because, and then two, in addition or coupled with media, is also the lack of education that we are taught coming from either end. You have those who are coming from the continent and have never really had a true historical lesson about what happened to people, our African people, when they came here. I do a lot of community workshops, and one of the biggest things that I started instituting was making sure that people understood Black history. Basic Black history. Going from there. Thinking about the fact that not just stopping at slavery, but also dealing with Jim Crow, also dealing with the Civil Rights Movement. It wasn't that long ago, because I think even now, often what happens to me is I can be walking down the hallway on campus or even in the community, and I'm going to a water fountain, and literally I'll have the thought, wow, it wasn't that long ago that I wasn't even able to take a drink at the same water fountain. And so being able to have that level of understanding and education and being able to say, okay, so now that I can go and drink pretty much water from anywhere, no store person, I can go and shop at any store. I don't have to be relegated to a certain side of the street in order to live there, things like that, and that's just, and I'm saying that on a basic level. I'm not talking about income or education level and all of that at this moment, but just thinking about the lack of education that happens or that hasn't occurred. And then on the other end, also, again, the lack of education in school systems here. They talk about Africa for maybe 1 week in the entire K through 12 education. So you're thinking about children who are growing up who have never seen a real true picture of what's happening on the continent. And while I appreciate International Night and International Day or International Week at elementary schools and high schools and so forth, there's still so much more that we can do in terms of education and really being able to understand the fact that the only languages, there aren't the only languages such as German and Spanish. There's also, and besides French, there's also Swahili too. In my language, this is called, we have our own tribal language, Leblanc. That's the name of my language. You know, so why can't we make Swahili as part of the major languages that are studied in K through 12? You know, so things like that. So for me, it's when we talk about that aspect of diving deeper and this aspect of unity, to me, we have to be able to really also understand how media has portrayed each other, as we talked about earlier, but also really understanding the power of what education can do for both those of us on the continent and not on the continent.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just offer a response to Ali's question, which I think is critically important, on examples of unity. And from a South African perspective, I wanted to suggest there's no better example about African unity as the anti-apartheid movement. And it's well worth studying. And in fact, I don't know how many students you know, but this campus was a hotbed for anti-apartheid organizing. And if everybody is up for it, I think that needs to be pulled out of the archive to show. And these were people who were differently racialized here. All right? It wasn't just African American. Right? These were racialized Caucasians. So the anti-apartheid movement says, I think, two things. One is, unless you're in a movement, there's no possibility of unity. In other words, you have to be organizing. All right? Unless you're in a movement, unless you're part of a bigger diaspora, it's not going to happen. Right? You'll settle for anything. So that's just a call out to keep on moving, you know, sort of forward. The downside from a South African, and again, I'm talking from an intergenerational perspective, and it's for this generation to decide whether and how the Black Lives Matter movement matters. Elsewhere, there was sporadic attempts in South Africa specifically, but they gave you these cultural politics. So I just wanted to kind of ask students to lean back into the historical precedents. There are examples. We just have to underscore what Susan said. We've got to know our history. And there are at least two texts I want to completely insist on. You have to go and reread W.E.B. Du Bois's Africa in the World. How many students have read this book? That's a very important book. Stephen Biko's I Write What I Like. All right, Frans Fanon's Lettre Avenir. We have to go and reread it. It must be mandated for any student who aspires for African American unity or unity of the African diaspora to go and at least Du Bois's Africa in the World is a crucial text. All right, to kind of leave with. So, dig back into the archive, and the archive is as close as here, and we need to refocus why that was so important. Now, it didn't work out the way it did in South Africa because, and again, the earlier question was this issue of nationalism. So how come South Africa went into the xenophobic nationalism that it did? We have to guard against the resurgence of these nationalisms. This is very, very dangerous times right now. Extremely dangerous. From an older perspective, I don't think the world has been as unstable. I don't think I'm scaremongering, right? Specifically because we have to forget our nationalism. It's nice for food and fun and festivals, but there's a very dangerous dark side to it. I've seen it go off the rails in South Africa. You are seeing now a xenophobic nationalism about building walls. All right, we have to forget. So that nationalism is one of the first things that Fanon here is our teacher. Right, but the pitfalls of national conscience. Also, to underscore the danger, I don't want to take too much time. The militarization in Africa right now is unprecedented. There are much more American troops in Africa right now, destabilized, almost totally destroyed Libya. All right, the Sudan, the Sahel. All right, there are those command posts. So again, we have to have an anti-war and peace movement back here. So Africans need to take seriously the militarization in Africa right now by American military, where African Americans are serving. All right, so we need to think through these difficulties about how we're going to think around those sorts of questions. The main point I'm trying to suggest here is these are extremely dangerous times. Right, this is an urgent question of the unity because there are forces at play all right, that's about division rather than unity. But on a more hopeful note, there's not without precedent. All right, the anti-party movement, I want to suggest, is an important movement to study about how they were able to achieve what they did. Right, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns that the Palestinian movements are now trying to take on board comes from that era. So there's a lot of organizing to be done. I would highly encourage the ASO to take up and make that exhibit in the archive about the anti-party movement. Thank you.
So I just wanted to comment really quickly on what we were talking about when it came to unity, as well as education in general for the African as well as the diaspora and the African American communities. I think it's difficult to have conversations on race relations when it comes to Africa because there's so many different racial ethnicities and racial backgrounds within Africa that you have a difficult time and you don't really understand that difficulty until you're physically within the continent itself. You know, there is a black African, there's a dark-skinned black African, there's a colored person, there's an Indian, there's an Asian, there's a white person, and you just don't even really know where you fit in that spectrum until you're physically inside of the country. And then you have to have that conversation when you come to America, because my mother, who is colored, never had to even have the conversation that she is black until she came to America. So to have that conversation about race and race relations and what it means to be African in America, American in Africa, African in Africa, being raised in America, those are a lot of different conversations to have. And you have sometimes of a confusion. So when we're talking about unity, how do we unify a country and a continent and people who are not unified within themselves as a whole? So the other conversation about slavery as African history is not, because slavery is not all of Africa's history. Slavery is part of Africa's history. And not all Africans were slaves, and not all, of Africa had to do with American slavery. And so this conversation and educating America, Black people, Africans about slavery, I think there has to be a conversation that slavery is not Africa's history. Slavery is part of Africa's history because there are countries within Africa that had to do with slavery, but not all of Africa had to do with slavery. And then also, lastly but not least, is the trauma within the immigrant community. Trauma within the immigrant first generation Africans within America. Having that conversation that you're the one who made it out. And to be able to have that conversation within these spaces, we talk about unifying people, but it is so hard to unify when you yourself are lost, because you don't know where you fit in, you don't know who is part of your people, who is your circle, who you are allowed to belong to, because even within this community, you are lost because you're too African to be American, too American to be African, too black to be white to be black, too educated to be stupid, but too stupid to be educated. And so you are so lost within this realm. How do we, as a community, come together when we have all of these issues?
I don't have an answer to that. But what I would like to do is, if you could also pass the mic to Dr. Waji, who's here with us from SIU. He's right here. Because I think if you see in the program as well, he's working on a paper and a project that's also touching on some of the things that we're talking about. So when we get a moment, I'd like for him to respond as well, because we're not at all claiming to be all the experts here. And I think part of why we instituted this year a dinner forum is so that we can all walking away knowing that the person next to us has taught us something that we didn't know before. So if somebody does have an answer or some anecdotes, please raise your hand and share with us as well.
How it plays a role or how it affects the efforts to bring unity amongst ourselves.
Can you explain on that?
The ADOS movement.
Can you explain that? Everybody may not know what you're talking about.
African descendants of slaves. And so it's, the quick part of it is it's a movement to push for reparations, but only for those who were direct descendants of slaves. And so there's a huge movement now that's being pushed socially around the country. I'm just curious what your thoughts are, how that affects the efforts to bring unity and also for all the place.
Okay, so I'd like to have questions with this. Can he be, well, so when you say reparations, define what you mean. Like, that's the thing, I feel like things, now I don't know a lot about this, so I'm not speaking about this particularly. But to me it seems slavery is a terrible thing that happened. It's evil, it's inhuman, it's a terrible thing that happened. And the effects still trickle down till today, right? What I have a problem with is when people say, because this happened to you, you can't do that. Because something happened to you, it can limit the speed of your growth. It can affect your mind state, it can change your path, but it doesn't stop you. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's like someone who was an athlete who got into an accident and broke their legs or something like that. That's a terrible situation. But then many of them still continue on to be athletes because they have that zeal and that drive. And one of the things I found is that people who focus very much on things with respect to reparations and stuff like that tend to instill things in children. For example, I remember my mom had seen a few videos on, I'm not completely sure which ones, but like stuff on slavery, right? And she's like, this is going to make her want to hate white people. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. Why? Which of the white people do you know today? And this is when we were still in Nigeria. Well, she's still in Nigeria, but before even I came here. So she hadn't even had interactions with white people. And then now, you know, sometimes she travels here and she's like, she just doesn't. And I'm like, okay, so which one of these people do you know did anything that offended you directly? Or even anyone you know. I don't know anyone in my family or my own generation who had been through slavery. Not saying it didn't happen, not saying it didn't affect me. But then to then tell me that, like, because slavery happened, I don't have the chances. That's what, if I honestly do internalize that, and for people who have, that can then limit me, because then it could be like what I said about being a girl applying to engineering, right? It could then be, oh, I'm trying to get into this job, but it's all white, so I'm not going to. And you said so yourself, not too long ago, we couldn't do that. And then when you then instill that in your mind, you are the one now restricting yourself. So it's important to acknowledge those things. It's important to realize that they happened. It's important to actually talk about them and have those discussions. Don't sweep them under the rug. Don't tell me slavery, racism doesn't exist in America today. But then when you take that as a stumbling block, as like, this is something that defines me, this is something that is where I have a problem. Because no one should believe another person is giving them, is imposing limitations on them, unless they physically are. Then it's illegal. Then the person gets arrested. Should get arrested.
I'd like to reply to some of that. Real quickly, I think it's important for us to understand that the impact of something. If you look at the history of this country, right? For example, Japanese Americans were given reparations for their experiences in the internment camps. Slave owners were given reparations for, the Civil War and what happened. And so I think it's a mistake for us to suggest that the financial and the institutional and the structure that is America today is not owed to the backs of people like Harriet Tubman and others. I think it's a huge mistake. And to take it one step further, and I use the example, if you look at, slaves were not allowed to own anything, right? And so everything was taken from them. And so if you have the white folks from that generation, right, and they passed it to the next generation, but slaves couldn't pass something on, and then that generation passed, but slaves still couldn't pass something on. And you look at these banks, and from being from Missouri, places like Anheuser-Busch was built on the backs of slavery, Anheuser-Busch owes. You know, now, do they owe, you know, yeah, I don't know the particulars about the direct descendants and all this kind of other stuff, right? But at the same time, we must also understand and acknowledge, like for example, that's part of my research is trauma, right? Racialized stress and trauma, and specifically, if you look at people like Dr. Joy DeGroove's book on post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? We respond to those things in a very different manner, right? My little brother and I were both raised in the same household, okay? We both had a crack-addicted mother. But here I am having this conversation with you, working on a PhD while he's running from the feds. So the same experience impacts us very different ways. We went through the same educational system, same church, same mother, same whoopings, all of that. But we respond to it differently, and I think it's important for that to be noted. So I just respectfully disagree with you in terms of you know, someone owing something, but at the same time, I don't want to limit you know, the impact of my mother's beatings on my brother. You see what I'm saying? Just because I was able to overcome, I don't want to speak down on his experiences and the things that he internalized and went through. And I just think that's very important.
Let's not forget that France is declaring reparations from Haiti for getting their independence from slavery. So this economics is very, very institutional. It's very simplistic, I think, to say that those people who suffered from oppression should just sort of, you know, move on. I mean, if we look at what's happening in the UN right now with all the victims of rape from the Congo and all of these, Sierra Leone or wherever you name it, right now, I think like yesterday or a couple of days ago, what's his name? That guy, President of the United States. What he did was, in the UN, he imposed a regulation by which you have to take away the reproductive, it limits the amount of money that you can give for reproductive health for women who are victims of this. So let us not underestimate the importance of economic reparations, because the capitalism is all about more money for those that are in power. So I think you have to be a little bit more open-minded about this issue of reparations.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Sure.
Sorry for the quick time.
Yeah, so actually I will take the conversation to another dimension, another aspect, especially to talk about the colonial legacy, how like the European powers have been using development and humanitarianism as a kind of justification. So that to justify this to their like people, to the general public, so that they say we are doing this just for the benefit of the continent, which is only was used as a mean to an end. And we investigate like the fact that these like institutions, when we talk about the League of Nations, which was created also to continue this kind of justification, and the creation of the United Nations, in which continue these policies of exploiting the continent and the countries. And also, we know we need to reach a phase of reconciliation with ourselves, because we are not only victims, because some of us have contributed this. Our leaders have contributed for this continued like exploitation and the steps that we are like suffering from now. Because these policies have been like approved by our leaders who were like those like we can like negotiate how they were like reaching the like power, but we can say how like the institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and foreign powers, how they've been like infiltrated in the continent, and even they still after the disappearance of this colonial power, that actually we're still living in a modern kind of slavery. So we're still like abusing and exploiting the continent with our own people actually. So we need to reach and actually reconcile and understand that it was not only done by others, it also was done by us also. Because some people always try, we don't need to be always be the victims, but always need to reach this kind of, we need to be true to ourselves and see sometimes when we have the chance to make a change, we didn't do it. We just continue at the same narrative. And we can witness this like in the different contexts, like even right now, with a lot of opportunities, even like the kind have the opportunity, we couldn't even like change that. Thank you.
2 or 3 more, I see your hand. I thought I saw a hand from this right here.
I'd like Kaya to speak, yes.
Okay, so Kaya after.
Yes.
I really wanted to speak to the conversation around reparations. So what I do know about my family history is the direct impact, socioeconomically speaking, of racism on my bloodline, both on my mother and my father's side. So the women in my bloodline, pretty much every generation before my mother died early because of poverty. This was not a mental state of mind, this was real poverty that was affecting their lives. So I definitely get what you were sort of speaking to, which is that you want to be liberated in mind, but Black Americans are the only ones here on this land who don't have even an acknowledgement that there was something so severe that happened, and that for generations it has crippled us socioeconomically speaking. Native Americans have casinos and other sort of incentives that at least speak to that, and I think that those are rudimentary steps by our government, but there seems to be a sort of erasure of Black suffering, and not just in the context of Black history, but sort of civics from a modern day standpoint. So what I had to do was really study the lifespan of my mother and my father, and the policy making and the policing around Blackness. Those are the places that I personally am seeking restorative justice. What reparation looks like for me, that sort of empowerment through education, but then also saying these are the things that my mother and my father lost along the way because of these specific policies. And these are the things, to me, I feel should be restored within my community, and I seek to do those things.
Before we speak to the next person, just really quickly, I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm not necessarily saying ignore it didn't happen. And I started with saying I don't necessarily understand what that community or group you're seeking is. And like you said, you have a personal experience. What I spoke to was then inculcating people who then don't have a direct, I mean, for example, like you talked about your brother. I'm not going to downplay what happened. I don't know a Black African mom that wouldn't hit their children. And everyone responds to it very differently, right? But then where I would then disagree is if you then start telling your children, hey, look, my mama hit me. And because of that, this happened to your brother, to my brother, so you can't be able to do that. Do you see what I mean?
I don't.
So, using the bad example that happened to someone else to then tell them that potentially they can't grow if they're not directly impacted. So your brother is directly impacted, and a lot of people are directly impacted. And I don't know how to deal with that. Like everyone here has said, like it's not like an easy thing to discuss, right? But them saying, yeah, this happened to someone else, and it is going to happen to you. There's a difference between this potentially could happen to you, and you need to be able to be strong enough to overcome that, or let me know, or discuss it, or point it out, or call it out, or let them know that what they're doing is racist, right? As opposed to, yeah, you can't do anything because of that. So like you said, you had a personal experience, that's your personal experience, and that's valid. And that's something that should be atoned for, right? But then what I spoke to was not necessarily reparations in and of themselves. It was then passing the idea of like, this is, do you get what I mean? The idea of...
I do, but I don't think you quite understand the trauma and how, as Sister was saying, the policies and practices and procedures that persist today. Another example, real quickly, and I definitely want to hand the mic back, is, for example, I'm definitely afraid of snakes. I will hurt one of you trying to get away from a snake, right? Now, here's where it gets interesting, to your point. I've never had a bad experience with snakes. Watch this. My mother and my grandmother both had bad experiences with snakes. Trauma can be passed down genetically. You understand? So, and so here I am, afraid of snakes. So guess what I told my children, right? About snakes. You see what I'm saying? Even though I didn't have that experience. But it affected me. Those experiences still affect me, and now I'm telling it to my grandchildren, right? And so it's important to see, and not only that, oppression never went away, it just changed. So you stop the Jim Crow. Now we have mass incarceration, right? And then we go from mass incarceration to shoot a brother on the street if it makes a wrong move. It's still, it's the same devil, different levels, okay? And so you seem to talk about it as if you're saying, just get over it. And quite frankly, African Americans, we could get over it if they would take the foot off our neck.
Right.
And that's what I think is missing, is that these things are still there, right? And so when we hear, like the doctor said, the nationalism and all these things that are taking place, that not only impacts African Americans, it impacts all of us, but it also suggests something. So when I hear somebody talking about build a wall to talk about the Latinx community, I also know that in the same way you would discriminate and oppress them, you were just a breath away from continuing your oppression of me and others. And so it never went away. And that's why I think it's important to remember. Now, some of us have been able to evolve and to grow and to move on. Again, i.e. myself versus my brother, but I can't dismiss his experience. And I also need to say, you know, to my children, don't judge your uncle because he's not like your brother. I mean, like your dad, his brother. He had some things and he dealt with it differently, right? Now, that again, but I do agree with you in terms of we have to find a way to move forward. We have to try to fall forward. But at the same time, if we're unable to, don't villainize those who can't move forward because of the trauma, social, economic, mental, bodily, etc. And I don't think you're quite saying that, but quite frankly, you're hinting at it, albeit indirectly.
Thanks, Dr.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say I'm very happy to be here. This is my first time coming to ASO event, and I brought my children because I wanted them to understand that we talk about Africa and Africanness in my household as an African American woman, but if they're not making a direct connection with actual people who are from the continent, then it stays like kind of an abstract idea, right? So there's a couple of things I want to talk about, but I'm going to keep it real brief. Number one is I'm a second-year doctoral student and former educator, so my research area is in education. And I was just having this conversation with my children, actually, the other day, that it wasn't too long ago where learning any kind of thing, math, reading, anything, was illegal, right? And so when you're starting from this point where, let's even take it back even a little further, where we were not even considered human in this country. So our humanity literally had to be legislated. And I don't think anybody, who has not gone through that and understand like what it means to not be considered human. Our children were not our own. I do also come from a Black African feminist perspective. Our children were not our own. I could carry a child in my tummy for 9 months and that child could be snatched from me. And that's a very different experience than I know that women have had on the continent. It's very different. But each of our traumas collectively are things that we can also organize around. Instead of like thinking, okay, it's more than just attitudinal, like as far as like white supremacy, I think it's a thing we're talking about here. It's systemic. In Americas, and I mean the Americas, so I'm talking about Canada, US, Mexico, Jamaica, Haiti, South America, down in Brazil. Like in the Americas, Africans were transported over for chattel slavery, right? It's not a US thing. And I think we gotta kind of move away from that. But the US, and I will argue even some of the countries in South America, did something kind of weird with it, and it's like we're still feeling the repercussions of it today. Like down in Brazil, the person who they elected as president, I don't know a whole lot about like the Brazilian context, but I know that Black people who look like me are scared for their lives, right? And that's not an attitude of being that, they're still living their lives and trying to be. I'm like Mario Franco, who was advocating for the Black people that live in Venezuela, was shot down, doing her job because of the color of her skin, the audacity that she had to advocate for her people. So I think that when we talk about global, I think the word you said, global Africanness, the anti-Blackness is global. And that is, I think, a unifying thing that we can organize around. I just got back from Canada
from a conference, and they were talking about the Aboriginal community in New Zealand facing the same thing, you know, that we were facing today. And it's not, and I'm gonna say this one more time because that's how strong that feeling. It's not attitudinal. I could be the most positive, focused, like I believe I can fly type person, go out there, you know, and do my thing. I was just sharing an article the other day about people who are learning how to code, and Google's talking about they don't have these jobs, but they won't hire people who are black who have the skills. Like that is a real thing. And when we understand that, when we're not fighting, it's not racism, because racism is nice and friendly and fluffy the way that they like kind of made so it's like you're not being nice to me, or I didn't do anything to you. It's a systemic white supremacy that has been established from modernity, and understanding that it's a way of thinking, like a way of being, a way of just operating in this world. Somebody said something about like Eurocentric epistemologies. What did you say? I can't remember that you said.
We all practice.
Right.
The raggedy scraps.
Right, the raggedy scraps of that European, Western epistemology. And it is raggedy because it's very individualistic. It is very anti-community, and it's very competitive. And I think, I don't know, but I've not been to Africa yet. But I feel like that's not necessarily the epistemological framework that we as a people, even with our differences and infighting and tribalism, I feel like that's not the way that we operate. So I just wanted to say, I appreciate being here. I appreciate being in this conversation. I love all y'all. We just found out, my family, from years, we just found out we are descendants from Ghanaians, so we are Ghanaian. And, but not just Ghanaian, right? So then on my grandfather's side, we're also from Benin and Burkina Faso. Like, we all, so when people like who are U.S. Americans, Black Americans, like we're African, like for real, we African. Because we're from like all over. So I appreciate like the diverse views that we're all bringing to the table. But I would really like us to think about, and maybe one of you guys can speak to, what are some principles that we can organize on politically, right? Because liberation is a political thing. It is not a feeling or, you know, kumbaya. It is like, what can we do to actually get some power? Because that's what liberation is about. Who is in power and who is not in power? And how might we think about like organizing politically?
This conversation shouldn't end here.
Yes.
I think there is a need for us to make a periodic, attempt at bringing us together. And definitely, there's a lot of collaboration that I think should go into this. So I'm sorry I didn't come. But I just want to mention two things as I invite you to wrap up. And if there's anything I think I like, I love what you said, Kai, about organizing around the trauma. I love that. I love that. We need to organize around the trauma. And I also like what we said about acknowledgement and taking the risk to build a relationship. And lastly, I think one of the things that has helped me, in my experience and understanding my research and understanding the relationship between Africans and African diaspora populations is that whatever happens to one of us affects all of us. And I think we see it that way, even though, and I tell people, I just go out from California, but we could go where I presented on, being Black and international and American. One of the things I was saying is that, there is so much opportunities and possibilities within the Black ethnic diversity, which I think we need to leverage on. So whatever happens to one of us affects all of us. If we can have ourselves with this mindset, then I don't necessarily have to experience all of the things that my African American brothers and sisters have experienced before I validate their experience, before I join them to say, you know what, we're in this struggle together, we're going to try to see how we can make sure. I love what you said, all of us. We have to start thinking about all of us. Okay, right. So thank you so much. I invite my colleagues to chime in, that advice and that's my
Okay, thank you all so much for this just amazing discussions and contributions. We started with diversity, and we had our panelists try to define what they think diversity is. One thing that I'm taking away from all this discussion is the fact that, like Ade just said, a lot of things have happened to people. Being it slavery, being brought, like coming to school here as an African, that changes you. And I think she did mention it. I feel like I'm a hybrid. I'm not Ghanaian enough to be Ghanaian. And yet, of course, I'm not American enough to be American either. Because when I go back to Ghana, it's not the same anymore, because I've been here for so long. So things are different. So now I'm different from Africans or Ghanaians living in Ghana. And then also, obviously also, I'm not like 100% American either. And I didn't have a direct impact from slavery, because my ancestors didn't come here through slavery. So I cannot relate to people who have that direct impact. But then also, like everyone has already alluded to that, I cannot downplay the impact that people who have felt it directly have. But one thing that I believe that is a strong thing that can carry us all forward is empathy. It's kind of what I have always, used for my life. You should always try to put yourself in people's shoes and have this open mind. And you cannot just judge people you have a strong upbringing. You have family that gives you the sky is your limit, or probably space, or whatever, Mars, or wherever, like some other galaxy. Not a lot of people have that. I've seen an African American movie, that one movie, I don't remember the title, but it was just so heartbreaking because the guy had gone to prison. He came back and was trying to pick up his life, but he just couldn't, there was nothing to do to make that happen. He couldn't even get a job because he needed a place, and he couldn't even have he couldn't even get a phone, because a lot of these things involve a lot of things, and there was just nothing to make any of those things happen. And not a lot of people understand the pain and struggle that comes with all this kind of, being part of that kind of society. And I'm not going to pretend that I understand, I don't. But if I can put myself in someone's shoes who's gone through that, then it would be easier for me to be able to relate to them. We are different, but we must come to that place where we agree to disagree and not just judge people and just break them down just because we haven't experienced what they have experienced. So thank you all, and it's just been amazing, and I'm really glad that I was part of this. I'm gonna head over to Susan.
Okay. Wow, I see the faces looking at me saying more, but I just want some cake and cookies. But first of all, give yourselves a hand of Thank you all very much.
Thank you.